our website, usually about 3 or 4 hours after the session is ended. It takes me that long to get the site set up. We'll also put the PowerPoints from today's talk, as well as any notes, links, or other information that comes out from our speakers. We do have a full panel today. We'll be starting off with Cindy Blue from the City of Greensboro, then moving to Sophia Crisp from Housing Consultants Group, back to Sonia Randolph, Liz Alverson, and Troy Powell, all from the City of Greensboro's Neighborhood Planning. We'll be talking about the 10-year affordable housing plan, as well as some of the programs and projects that fall under that plan, existing, new, and evolving programs. So I'm going to share my screen here. And Cindy, can everybody see that screen?
Okay, I think we're good. Thank you, Stephen.
Super, and I'll just advance this as you need.
Okay. All right, welcome everyone. I'm so glad to see so many people on the screen today with an interest in housing. This is wonderful. The city's recently adopted Housing Greensboro, Creating Opportunities to Build a Better Community, is a 10-year plan for the next period of time to focus in our resources and our experience of all of our providers and our partners on improving housing conditions in the city of Greensboro. Go ahead, Stephen. Our consultant through this process that worked with the city and with the community was HRNA Advisors, and these slides came from a deck that they had prepared for a previous presentation, so I wanted to give a shout out and a thanks to them for this information. Let's go ahead. Next slide. All right, the plan is composed of 4 primary areas: affordable rental homes, neighborhood reinvestment, access to home ownership, and supportive housing. And while this presentation today is a very condensed presentation of the plan, I do want to encourage people with an interest to go to our website, read the full plan, certainly engage with us. This is going to be an ongoing process as we get into the implementation phase, and we'd love to have your input. I believe that Stephen was going to post the link to the plan in the chat box, so the information will be there. Thank you. All right. The four primary areas of the housing plan include affordable rental homes, neighborhood reinvestment, access to homeownership, and supportive housing. We'll go through each of those areas and the goals and strategies that have been outlined in those. The other piece that we're going to cover today, and Liz Danley, who is now Mrs. Liz Alberson, is going to be presenting the work that the city is doing in response to the COVID-19 situation, the emergency rental assistance, the expanded legal aid to halt problematic evictions and to keep people in their housing, and rehousing for anyone who has fallen out of housing. She's going to be talking about those issues in her section of the presentation. Go ahead. And we're jumping right into the affordable rental homes section. This slide talks about the mismatch between incomes and rents and what has been going on in the rental markets. While incomes have been trending upwards, which is a really good sign, and rent has been growing at a modest rate, totaling about 5%. The problem really is those lower income households, those ones who don't have a bachelor's degree, whose median earnings are less than $30,000 a year, their earnings have not kept up with the rate of increases, and they're the groups that are falling behind. As we talk through our rental housing strategies, you will see that, that those are the groups that we're really reaching out to and trying to address. Next slide. And who are these folks who are earning less than $30,000? The median income for a family of 4 in Guilford County, as calculated by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, is $66,600. So that's folks at the median, and that's a household of 4. So folks earning $30,000 annually in Greensboro, that's folks who are earning about half the median income. You've got some job categories there that earn in that income category, but some of the significant information is in the smaller boxes ahead of that, which states that 40% of our total job growth over the last 8 years has been in this under 30% of area median income category. Lower wage jobs, lower skill jobs in some instances. And so folks at that income level are really struggling in keeping up with the price increases in rent. And 48% of those households under $30,000 include children, which anybody who's been following the situations in the schools and trying to keep everyone engaged and participating in schools has been an enormous challenge, particularly hitting some of those lower income families. Go ahead. Okay, this slide talks about the shortage of affordable rental homes. And I want to be clear here that we're not talking about a shortage of houses, although there is some of that. We do need to increase our supply. But what we have is an increasing gap in homes available and affordable at those lower rent levels that are required by folks who are earning these lower income levels. Right now, we're looking at an affordability gap of about 4,000. But if things continue, and in the direction that trends are indicating, over the next 10 years, we could be looking at an 11,000 unit gap in terms of units that are affordable to folks at these lower income levels. So part of what this plan is trying to do is to address what we can for those affordability gaps. And if you go on to the next one, we'll talk a little bit about the strategies that were outlined in the plan for addressing the supply of affordable rental homes. The first one is requiring deeper affordability in projects that the city does invest in. The city makes investments in the development of housing and the rehabilitation of housing. And in return for that, we require a period of affordability, which protects the affordability for that period. This strategy would require us to look at providing some additional subsidy or other means of other subsidy coming into those projects that will help make them more affordable to those lower income tenants. We're also looking at partnering with the Greensboro Housing Authority on their redevelopment. They have been going through a comprehensive redevelopment of all of their housing sites as part of their rental assistance demonstration program. And the last big one that they are working on, and they're working on the plans right now, is for the Smith Homes site along West Florida Street and Freeman Mill Road. So the city will be working with them through that. It's going to be a massive redevelopment. There's 430 units there now to bring that property up to current standards and make it livable and sustainable for the long term. A third strategy under the plan is to establish a housing preservation fund. This is a fund, a lending fund that is targeted towards the acquisition and preservation of existing affordable housing units to make sure that they stay affordable for the long term and that they stay in good quality. And we will be working particularly with the local lending community, the banks, and our philanthropic community to put together the funds that can make those deals work. Some other entities in North Carolina are doing this. I know that in Durham, they are targeting their housing preservation fund towards acquisition. Those will be some of the strategies that we're going to work through as we develop this proposal. You know, what are the city's goals going to be? Is it going to be acquisition? Is it going to be acquisition and rehab? What are the affordability limits that will be in place? And what are the lending criteria that will go into that? So that's going to be one of the early stage projects that we work on. There's also creating a public land disposition policy. There are lands in city ownership. There are also lands in other governmental ownership that could potentially be repurposed as affordable housing potential sites. And so we are looking at those now to see what we have and what could be made available for affordable housing. The last strategy in the affordable rental homes is subsidizing 4% low-income housing tax credit development. This is a particular subset of the tax credit development pool, and it combines a tax credit along with state housing bonds. And these projects tend to require additional subsidy in order to make them work. So we're looking at ways that the city can partner with others to make those projects work in Greensboro. Moving on now, we'll talk a little bit about neighborhood reinvestment. This is where we go into a neighborhood and work with a neighborhood to preserve and promote the affordability and the marketability of that neighborhood to stabilize it. This is different from what some folks may know of as redevelopment. Redevelopment is a statutory process where under state rules, you can declare an area blighted and you can create a plan for reinvestment in that area and then carry out that plan. The neighborhood reinvestment areas are a little bit lighter touch. We're going to be going in and we're going to be looking at what are the things that we can do to build on the strengths that are already there. These are areas that have strong civic engagement. They have neighborhood leadership. They have organized neighborhood meetings and representation. There is market activity going on in these neighborhoods, and it just may need to be bolstered. There is good quality housing stock. It's not a severely distressed area. And there are neighborhood amenities and other investments that are going on that we can build on and make sure that these neighborhoods don't tip into a more distressed condition. Next slide, please. And when we do go into a neighborhood, and this is just a sample created to say what could be done, the aim is to impact about 1 in 12 housing units over a 5-year period in order to make a change that you can effectively measure, that something is happening there that is moving it in the right direction. And if you had a neighborhood that had about 1,500 housing units in it, that would be about 125 units. In this particular scenario, we estimated that there would be about 30 units that might need code attention. They're either under an order for demolition or there is an order to repair, and those properties just need to get repaired through city programs. Homeowner rehabilitation loans. You may have some older homeowners in the neighborhood who just haven't been able to keep up with the property maintenance, and they may need some assistance in order to get their properties back in shape. Then there also may be some vacant lots where either housing has been torn down or it has never been built, where we could go in with infill development programs and build some new housing for ownership. And also, as Sophia Crisp with Housing Consultants Group will be talking about later, there is our down payment assistance program to be able to help folks to come in and buy these properties that may be on the market in these neighborhoods. And the estimation for a neighborhood of that size would be probably about a $5 million investment over a 5-year period. So some of the strategies that we'll use to effectively carry out neighborhood reinvestment include partnering with the neighborhoods. There needs to be a strong connection with neighborhood leadership, and this needs to be driven by neighborhood goals and neighborhood interests. We would go in and we would support rehabilitation and infill development with the city's programs, both existing and new programs that may get developed under this 10-year plan to get a pipeline of marketable homes in the neighborhood and to keep the quality of those homes up in the neighborhood. We are also internally looking at consolidating our rehabilitation programs. We have operated quite a suite of programs, but in order to make them really streamlined and to work effectively with our partners in code enforcement, we need to work to target those programs in ways that can address these neighborhood issues. And then implementing the community partnerships and engagement is another internal one that creates a pool of people that can come together and address the community's needs. Strategic code compliance is looking at pulling in those code resources, not just on a punitive side, as in, but also bringing the resources together to make those projects turn around and become quality, affordable housing. And again, this is where the public land disposition policy comes in. Do we have assets or resources within government that can be used to promote affordable housing in neighborhoods? Thank you, Stephen. Okay, we're going to move on to the access to homeownership piece. And Sophia will be talking a little bit more later about how this is being implemented on the ground in our Housing Connect GSO program for down payment assistance. The basis for this, this analysis came from the fact that the Greensboro has lost a total of about 1,800 homeowner households since 2010. And the significant portion of those households were earning less than the area median income. As you can see from the sort of right, the bars on the right of the chart, those who are earning above $60,000 were generally doing okay, holding their own in home ownership. When you get below $60,000, that's where you start to see those losses between 2010 and 2017. Next slide. So the strategies that have been developed to reduce those barriers to home ownership are really focused in on the down payment assistance program and looking at ways that we can design that program to really focus in on those areas, both geographically that are in need of additional home ownership, but also those income groups that are in need of the assistance to be able to access home ownership. And then once folks access home ownership, to have those enhanced services on the back end, the delinquency counseling, the default assistance that can make sure that they're able to stay in their houses for the long term. And then we move on to supportive housing. And again, Liz Alberson will be talking about this a little bit in her section on the COVID response and homelessness. But the city of Greensboro, over the point in time counts over a several year period, we generally average around 600 homeless individuals at any given point in time. And we also have the unfortunate distinction of a very high eviction rate. According to some sources, we had the 7th highest eviction rate in the country. So not only do we have 600 people who may be homeless, some of them unsheltered at a given time, but we also have this pipeline coming from the eviction process that feeds into that homelessness situation. And so what we're looking at are eviction diversion programs and stabilization programs that I believe Stephen Sills will also probably chime in on as we get to that section in Liz's presentation. But if you can go on to the strategies, we'll take a look at some of the things that we are looking at doing here. The first is to dedicate funding to support the Housing First model, which is getting people into housing. Don't make them sit out on the streets and wait to be able to qualify and wait to become sober. Get them into housing, and then they are much more able to deal with the issues that may have caused their homelessness in the first place. Continue participation with the continuum of care and work through that process. And then on the construction side, we're looking at constructing more supportive units and targeting units within the housing that we do fund to create supportive units, and providing short-term rental assistance that can help to keep people housed who may be on the brink of losing that housing. So going into implementation, we'll talk a little bit about the phases of implementation. We have a lot of work to do to carry out all of this work over the next 10 years. So we are actively seeking people to participate in our working groups around these issues. And we'll be working on the following strategies. The first is identifying funding sources that can total about $50 million over the next 10 years is the projection for what it would cost to carry out the work that's outlined in this plan. That can come from public sources, it can come from private sources, it can come from philanthropic sources, but pulling together all of those resources and directing them in the direction that will carry out the activities in the plan so that we're all working together on common goals. The second is to establish working groups with those private and philanthropic partners so that we can come up with programs that work for everyone. Within city government and county government, working together within governmental programs between departments and between government entities to make sure that we're not indirectly creating barriers to affordable housing, or if there is a project that we can jointly work on, that we have the right team members at the table and help to advance the project. And then facilitating that intergovernment coordination and collaboration, that is the teams all working together to keep us all on track. So the timeline and performance metrics and reporting on the progress against them twice a year, this will be making it very public and very transparent about what we are doing in order to be able to keep us all accountable and to keep us on track. And then a key piece of all of this is educating the community and making folks realize how important housing is for all of us. This is not a niche topic, this is a community topic, and the community really needs to be aware and engaged and willing to help in the development of affordable housing. Thank you. So where do we need people's help? This is the public-private partnerships that will help to drive this implementation. We are working now on the working group to establish a housing preservation fund. We will also be working with developers and our financing partners on creating deeper affordability and targeted low-income housing tax credit development. The LIHTC projects are really the prime development source of funding to create affordable housing. That's really the state's leading program, and we want to leverage it as much as we can, both for the 9% credits that provide substantial equity to a project, but also the 4% credits that are a little bit more of a struggle to make work in Greensboro's market, but we need to work together to find a way to do that. We will be partnering with our neighborhoods through neighborhood reinvestment to identify their issues and concerns and begin to map out the path to resolution. We will also be providing short-term rental assistance. Liz is going to talk about what's going on right now through the COVID assistance, but how that sets us up for the future in terms of stabilizing folks in rental housing. And then again, designing that community education and awareness campaign, really getting the word out there through all of our various media and other sources to educate and communicate and hopefully create the buy-in community-wide to be able to bring this plan to a successful conclusion. And I think I pretty much covered that under that last piece. So I am going to, Stephen, I'm not sure if you want to do questions now or you want to hold questions and move on through the others and bring it all together at the end.
We're going to hold questions.
Okay.
We've got some building up in the chat. Feel free, folks, to drop your questions in the chat. I'm building a stack of those, and we'll call on you after we've concluded the speakers. And I believe we're going to move to the second PowerPoint here. And first up was going to be Sophia Crisp, I believe.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sophia Crisp. I'm the Executive Director and Founder of Housing Consultants Group. We are a housing counseling agency, nonprofit, and we've been in existence about 16 years, and I'm happy to be here today and happy to be a partner with the City of Greensboro and be a part of the 10-year plan. Housing Consultants Group's part has to do with access to housing. And in order to get the Housing Connect GSO down payment assistance program, I'm going to go over to you who's eligible in terms of home purchases. So you must be a first-time home buyer, and that means you haven't owned a home in the last 3 years. And for this particular program, you must be buying in the city limits. There's another county program with another funding source that allows you to purchase in the county, as long as it's outside of the city of High Point. Two different funding sources, and this particular program is funded by the bonds that were approved several years ago. The down payment assistance is currently up to $10,000 towards assistance. You can buy a new or existing home, and there are income limits that apply. I believe Stephen just put a copy of the FAQ in the chat, but just to give you an idea of what the income limits are, they're up to 140% area median income, which for a household of 1 to 2 is $72,600, 3 or more, $84,700. The buyer must have a minimum investment in the process of $500, but I will tell you, by the time most buyers are finished with the home buying process, before they ever get to applying for down payment assistance, they've usually got about $1,500 to $2,000 in the process by the time they make their offer, put down earnest money, due diligence, and pay for their appraisal. They can receive no more than 20% of the cost of the house, and they must attend a HUD-approved 8-hour class in person, and in pandemic, it's virtually. Our classes are full. We do them twice a month. What I will tell you is, since the pandemic, whereas our classes face-to-face had an average of 30 people in them, our classes have an average of 75 to 80 people in them twice a month. So there is no lack of desire for people that want to be homeowners and are willing to sit throughout the course. The types of loans that they can get must be fixed rate. Part of the program is to make sure that people not only get in their homes, but they stay in their homes. We want to make sure that they know what their payment's going to be from year to year. So it is a fixed rate, 15 or 30-year product, and it's available to all types of loans as long as they're fixed rate, FHA, VA, conventional. Next slide, please. All right, so in order to be eligible, you must have a sales contract. Each buyer must be working with a buyer's agent realtor. Very important in the era of low inventory of homes. We were finding that some people were wanting to buy the homes that they were currently renting. Even if that happens, we require them to have their own agent. They need an advocate in this process. We let people know that this is the biggest expense you'll ever make. You need some guidance. And so we changed the guidelines when we took the program over in 2018. The contract is submitted to the lender, of course, and then the lender has a checklist of items that we need to receive. I will tell you that the processes for approval for first mortgage as well as down payment assistance needs to happen simultaneously. What we were finding is that lenders were waiting until they got all their work done and then submitting. It's a simultaneous process. We make the process is very easy. We want to make sure that what we need is the same thing that your lender needs. So there's no reason for any additional time needed to use down payment assistance. We're very much an advocate of getting it done on time per the guidelines of the contract and whatever the closing date of the contract is. The property must have an inspection by a certified home inspector. We do look at the inspection. That'll be the only thing that the realtor would have to provide to us. What we find is that, once again, with the lack of inventory of housing, people were wanting to buy things that really was not safe and decent to live in. Part of what Housing Consultants Group takes very seriously is the fact that we need to be good stewards with the money that's being provided to the buyer. We want to make sure that the home is safe and decent. We look at things like heating, cooling, plumbing, wiring, and foundation. We are not here to nitpick the house. We want to make sure it's safe and decent. And at the time of closing, that the buyer is going to have something that's not going to be a problem for them. We also encourage them to get a home warranty. We know that the first year of home ownership is a transition, and we do have post-purchase education that's required, but we know it's a year of transition. What we don't want to have happen is a buyer get hit with a major expense that they're not prepared for. So that's why we definitely advocate for home warranties for that first year. I think I've talked about the income limits, so we can go to the next slide, Stephen. Once again, the buyers can receive up to $10,000. We let them know it's not an automatic $10,000. We know that we need to see what the good faith estimate is that's been provided by the lender. So what that means is if they only need $7,500, they only get $7,500. It's not an automatic $10,000. Our goal is to make sure that the funds last as long as possible, which is why we leverage bond dollars with home or federal dollars if somebody's buying outside of city limits. The great thing is that your buyers are eligible for an additional $5,000 in down payment assistance if you buy in one of the areas listed here, which is Arlington Park, Eastside Park, Gorell Street, Old Ashboro, Phillips Lombardi, South Elm, and Willow Oaks. And the great thing about this as well is you don't have to be a first-time home buyer to get the assistance if you're buying in one of these areas. Next slide, Stephen. I think that's the end of my slides. I will tell you though, before I turn it back over to you, Stephen, one of the things we found after the tornado was a lot of renters came in getting assistance. And we took that as an opportunity about a year later to reach back out to them and launch hashtag 100 homes, wanting to know who wanted to be a home buyer. And what we've since then done is set up what I call a sequential method of putting folks in homes. We know that some people come to us and they're not credit ready. If they're not credit ready, we make coursework available by way of a 5-week boot camp that allows them to get a handle on their credit and budgeting and look at their spending behaviors. If that's where they happen to be in terms of their credit. If they happen to be a little closer to home ownership, we've got something called the Individual Development Account Program. We call it the IDA program, which puts them on a 6 to 12-month journey to home ownership, where we meet with them once a month and talk about one topic at a time as it relates to home ownership, and allow them to meet in a group setting once a month, and then allow them to meet one-on-one with a success coach. And we find that people with a credit score closer to being ready to home ownership, that's a good pathway for them as well. So I'd like to say we never tell people, no, you can't be a homeowner. We just need to tell you that sometimes it's going to take a little bit longer. And if people are willing to be accountable, we're willing to work with you. That's it, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Next
welcome.
up, we have Liz Alverson, and it's going to take me a little bit. I keep wanting to say your maiden
Don't
name.
worry, me too. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Liz Alverson, formerly Danley, and I am mainly going to be talking about the City of Greensboro's Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or better known as the CARES Act funding. And so just to jump right in, we received our first CARES Act allocation in April 2020, and you can see there round one was roughly $2 million. Just in our conversations with the community and evaluating the needs at the time, we have 3 different funding sources, and so I won't get into the acronyms. I listed them there for you, but we invested our CDBG CV dollars into those following activities, primarily focusing on emergency rental and mortgage assistance for our city residents. Additionally, we invested some of our funds into hotel motel assistance, trying to target those individuals experiencing unsheltered homelessness, and successfully exited many of those folks from hotel motel into permanent housing, using that advantage of knowing their location. Additionally, we invested some of our CDBG funds into emergency shelter and addressing the needs at the beginning of the pandemic of what our emergency shelters were facing. So lack of PPEs, the additional cost of having 24-hour, 7 days a week staff for the shelter in place, and so really invested in those needs as well. Additionally, we received an allocation in our Emergency Solutions Grant, and that's the ESG CV funds. We invested that full allocation into what one of our city priorities is, and that's rapid rehousing. And so the intent there is to rapidly rehouse individuals and families experiencing homelessness without those preconditions, and some of those things being employment, income, and criminal record, and trying to provide short-term rental assistance and services for those affected by COVID. Lastly, with our CARES Act funds, in round one, we received funds, and this is an area where we don't talk a lot about it, and I'm putting in the effort to educate the community more about our HOPWA funds, and that's our Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS grant. And so we have a regular HOPWA allocation, but we received some CARES Act funds to support activities through our partner, Central Carolina Health Network. And the main activities that we are funding through that are tenant-based rental assistance, and then short-term rental mortgage and utility assistance, so TBRA and STRIM-U. And again, those are going to be for individuals and families with AIDS, providing those activities. I didn't list it on the slide, but 2 additional new areas that we're funding with our HOPWA CV funds include some support services for those families, and additionally some hotel motel assistance as well, which is going to be huge this coming winter to build that partnership and bridge that gap. I listed down there who our community partners were for these funds, and I mentioned CCHN. Some of our shelters included Family Services of the Piedmont, GUM, the Interactive Resource Center, Salvation Army, Youth Focus, and YWCA. And for our emergency rental and utility assistance program, GHC is our partner for that initiative. And then for the emergency mortgage assistance program, that's going to be Housing Consultants Group, and you just heard from Sophia on that. As of October 2020, and you guys will have to forgive me, I've been out for a couple of weeks. As of October 2020, with those funds, we've helped over 455 households through these various initiatives and efforts. I'm looking to provide an update through November, but like I said, I've been out for a couple of weeks and I want to vet those numbers. But we are hitting quite a substantial number of folks and households in the city of Greensboro through those programs and initiatives. Okay, thank you, Stephen. We received a second round of CARES Act funding in the summer, around June and July, and that was a direct allocation only for ESG CV funds. Our primary efforts there and how we're going to allocate those funds is for homelessness prevention. So again, providing emergency rental and utility assistance through a homelessness prevention fund, hoping and trying to prevent seeing folks become homeless as a result of COVID. And so our efforts through these community partners listed below, GHC, GUM, and Salvation Army, the intent is to really help build up that piece of the continuum to not see a bottleneck later on in our emergency shelters. In addition to, and Stephen, you can go to the next slide, with those ESG CV funds and that second allocation, one of the things that we really wanted to focus on was the legal aspect as well. And so, Stephen, I'm going to have you tag team with me, but this is a relatively new development in the month of November. We are partnering with UNCG's Center for Housing and Community Studies and others, all listed there for an eviction mediation program. And the primary intent behind this is to offer an alternative way to address individuals' rental arrears by involving the landlord and the tenant and providing that mediation to avoid eviction. And so, Stephen, I don't know if you want to add anything to this. Again, this is a very new development. We're in the process of on our side of things, beginning to implement this program. But Stephen is a huge partner and obviously proposed this, but we have other community partners that are engaged in this as well, either through funding or providing services. And so, Stephen, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add before we move on. And of course, we can take questions at the end of this session.
Sure, I'll just add that Bruce Rich has been working with all of these partners to develop the program, to develop the pipeline. We're now in a state of piloting a few first easy cases to work out the kinks and how to mediate. Of course, we're still under the moratorium. We have a backlog of about 700 cases in Guilford County. We're anticipating that this will be a way to resolve those cases in a way that both benefits the landlord and the tenant and the court system as it tries to deal with the volume. A lot still in the air. As I said, the moratorium expires the end of this month. We don't know if the state will extend a local moratorium as the CDC moratorium expires. There's some talk about that at the state level. If so, that will allow a little bit more time to resolve some of these cases. The goal is to work with partner organizations that have funding to help alleviate back rent caused by COVID or other issues, as well as negotiate payback plans and stay in place or move out without eviction resolutions. Bruce, did you want to add anything? Or?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I think you given a pretty good capsule description. I just want to say that we think this can provide another tool that's not necessarily going to be applicable in every case, but we see that a lot of people are receiving rental assistance, but in many cases there could be more work done to take it the next step to work with the tenant and the landlord to stabilize the tenancy, to negotiate payment terms, to see if we can bring a better communication between the landlord and the tenant so that in more and more cases, we can avoid the drastic remedy of eviction. And so we're just beginning to experiment just in the last couple of days, launching our pilot program to see if, to get some real world experience and try to settle some of these cases.
Great, thank you both. I appreciate that. Stephen, you can move to the next one. One of the other programs that I'm going to touch base on a little bit is one that's actually been around for quite some time, and it's been around well before my time here, 2013, and that's the Emergency Tenant Assistance Program, or what we call ETAP. And primarily this is a partnership between the Community Foundation and the Greensboro Housing Coalition. And the intent here is to really help help households and families stabilize their lives by getting connected to safe and healthy, affordable housing. And primarily, the subpopulation that that we focus on here are those individuals at no fault of their own have been affected in some way, their housing has been affected in some way or displaced from homes at no fault of their own. And our biggest example here, or some of the examples I can provide, include those families and households affected by some type of co-compliance issue or an issue with the landlord. And so it kind of goes back to substandard living conditions. And so when a household is identified needing to relocate to somewhere new and continue to pay rent on their own, but need that support, that financial support to connect them either through a deposit or whatever it may be that qualifies them for this program, then they can be approved. And all of that goes through our partner, the Housing Coalition. And with this initiative, we have served in this community over 300 households comprised of about 900 individuals with relocation. And again, I just want to emphasize this program is targeted to individuals and families who have been displaced, again, at no fault of their own because of some type of substandard living condition. So I'm going to end that there. One last slide. I was asked to talk about some of our challenges and lessons learned. One thing that I want to emphasize when we've received these CARES Act allocations is we've worked really hard to continue to reevaluate the community needs on an ongoing basis. And I say that because some of the needs that were presented way back when the pandemic first started in February, March, April, those months, seem to have shifted and changed compared to what we need to focus on now. And so one of our goals and one of the things that I've learned quickly is to reevaluate what those needs are, really a week-to-week basis and ongoing, just to make sure that we are addressing, what we're seeing out there. And that takes place, through various means by talking to our community partners, seeing, getting feedback on those things and really allocating, where the need is. And so again, I talk about our shelters needing PPEs and support for that 24-hour, 7-day-a-week coverage for shelter in place. While those things are still needed, we're seeing more of a need now for that emergency rental, utility, and mortgage assistance. And then lastly, just to act quickly because, again, the need is increasing. Just when we expect there to be an increase in evictions and the need for assistance, moratoriums are issued. And so at some point, the need is still great and we're getting hundreds of applications for this assistance now, but we definitely anticipate that increasing substantially moving forward. So I'll end it there, Stephen, and thank you for that time.
Thank you, Liz. Next up, we have Sonia Randolph.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit today about our Lead Safe Greensboro program that we have. We are in probably our maybe third or fourth cycle, grant cycle in. So we did just receive another Lead Safe grant from HUD. And as you can see here on the slide, there are some eligibility in order to be eligible for the program, for the grant funds. There are some requirements that a household does have to meet. Mainly, it has to be a unit that is built prior to 1978. So we are looking at older housing because prior to 1978, houses used different type of paint, and that paint had lead in it. So we are looking for housing that contains that type of paint that was used back then. After 1978, houses don't actually use that type of paint anymore. So that is why the cutoff for the date is or are for units that are built prior to 1978. We are looking for houses or units that are located within Greensboro city limits. We are able to service units outside of the city limits in Guilford County, but that is only if a child living in that household who is under the age of 6 has an elevated blood lead level. We actually can, under this grant, we can help owner-occupied units, meaning that people who live in the units actually own their unit, or we can also assist rental units as well. Something that's actually not mentioned here on the slide, and I apologize for that, is that for owner-occupied units, in order for us to be able to assist a person or a household under this grant, they do either have to have a child under the age of 6 living in the home, or have a child under the age of 6 who resides there for a significant amount of time in the household, or have a pregnant woman that resides in the household. And that is for an owner-occupied unit. Now, as the slide does say, for rental units, however, there is no requirement that a child occupant at the time of assistance occupy the unit at the time of assistance. And then also the total household, regardless if it is a rental unit or if it is an owner-occupied unit, the total household income cannot exceed the program limits. And the program limits that is set by HUD is at the 80%, either at or below 80% of the area median income based off of the number of people who live in the household. Now, the grant amounts, we actually combine our grant funds that we actually receive from HUD with internal city funds. And so we are able to offer up to $30,000 combined for properties with 1 to 3 units. And we are also due for units, multifamily units of 4 or more units. We actually do up to 9,500 per unit. We also do have a Healthy Homes grant that is combined with the Lead Safe grant. And so through the Healthy Homes grant, we are able to offer an additional $5,000. So now the process, if someone, a household is eligible for the Lead Safe grant, we do actually oversee the process of contracting with a certified lead-based paint inspector or risk assessor who will actually perform a test to identify if there is actually any lead paint hazards in the home. We will actually look at the inspector's report after that risk assessment, and that report actually outlines any recommendations in terms of what things are kind of needed what kind of work would be needed to help with to reduce the lead paint hazards in the house. And so from there, we actually have a lead rehabilitation specialist, James Wolf, on staff, who actually helps to oversee that process with the risk assessment and with the inspector's report to kind of create a work write-up. And from there, from the work write-up, we actually do work with North Carolina lead abatement professionals to help remove the lead paint hazards from the house. And then the city staff will also monitor the work and ensure that the process is actually done up to EPA and HUD standards, meaning that there are safety guidelines that do have to be followed in terms of reducing any lead paint hazards. Next slide, please, Stephen. And so an additional thing that we are able to do here that some jurisdictions don't offer is that we know that a lot of times when there is any type of lead paint hazard reduction work that is going on in a unit, sometimes families do have to be relocated. So we do pay for relocation assistance up to 10 days during the process if we see that there are any sleeping areas, bathrooms, or cooking areas that will be inaccessible during that remediation period. So some other requirements that are part of the Lead Safe grant is that, of course, you do have to complete an application. And again, like I said before, household income has to be documented per HUD guidelines, and that's for all individuals living in the house aged 18 and over. And so the total household income must be at 80%, at or below 80% of the area median income. So again, we have a lead rehabilitation specialist on staff, and we also have a program manager on staff to oversee the work write-up process and the procurement, which is the bidding process. So we do bid to contractors on our approved contractors list. And so we do oversee that to make sure that, to ensure that everything, again, is followed according to the HUD guidelines for remediation work. You do have to sign a contract, and there also is a 3-year deed restriction. And I will note that if anyone is familiar with our previous Lead Safe grant, is that this is a change that we did make coming in. It was part of, as Cindy had mentioned before, out of the Housing Greensboro plan, is that one of the things is to consolidate our rehab programs and to ensure that everything is a little bit more streamlined. And so we want to make the process easier and more attractive to people, because our goal really is to help families and to help children so that it doesn't lead to any of the developmental problems that are associated with being in the presence or from consuming lead paint. We wanted to make sure that we would have a lot of people to apply and that would be excited to be a part of this lead grant program. And so one of the things that came out of that in order to streamline our program was to reduce the amount of time that our deed restriction. In the past, it was 5 years. HUD only requires us to have a 3-year deed restriction for the Lead Safe grant. So we have now reduced it from 5 down to 3. There is a deed restriction for both rental units and for owner-occupied units. So for rental units, the landlord must give priority, give rental priority to families with children aged 6 and under, and they must rent the unit at or below the prevailing HUD fair market rate based off of the number of bedrooms in the unit. And they also must keep the unit up to code, to minimum housing code. If the unit is an owner-occupied unit, again, meaning that you reside in the unit and you also own the unit, the property must remain as that person's principal place of residence, meaning that it cannot be rented for that 3-year period. And they must also agree to keep the property up to code. And that's all I have for Lead Safe grant.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you.
And I believe we now have Troy Powell. Troy, you're still muted.
There we go. Yep, says it. So my name is Troy Powell. I'm the Code Compliance Division Manager here for the City of Greensboro. And I'll talk briefly about the receivership pilot initiative. Properties that have been abandoned by owners or heirs or even left damaged without being repaired leaves most of our neighborhoods to deal with consequences that are beyond their control and results in decreasing property values and increasing crime. The abandoned, dilapidated, deteriorated housing affects the health, safety, and welfare of our occupants as well as your neighbors. Quick action by the city can help to prevent further neighborhood deterioration. This initiative was developed to preserve the increase of the city's housing stock, improve the appearance of neighborhoods by improving or removing blighted properties, and to increase the ability of affordable housing. Eligible properties for this program are those in which the Greensboro Minimum Housing Standards Commission has upheld the inspector's order to repair or demolish and approved for receivership. Currently, the city has 128 demolition ordinances issued by the commission that span from May 2012 to present, and 53 orders to repair that span from July 2016 to present. Without a receivership program, then we're at the peril of the property owner to either bring the property into compliance or the city to rehab the property with taxpayer dollars and to bring the properties into compliance. So the benefits of receivership, you're looking at quicker action to prevent further deterioration of a neighborhood, it increases the available, safe, and affordable housing, and you got the creation of jobs in the construction and property management industry. Now, qualified receivers, a receiver is qualified based upon the general statute. The general statute where we get this authority from is 160-1130. That statute takes effect January 1, 2021. The statute will lay out for you the petition and appointment of a receiver, the qualifications of a receiver, as well as their authority to rehabilitate, sell, apply a receiver's lien, as well as their tenure. Now, the qualifications of a receiver, there's 4 major qualifications in the statute. One is the financial ability to complete the purchase or rehabilitation of the property. 2, the knowledge of or experience in the rehabilitation of vacant real property. 3, the ability to obtain any necessary insurance. And 4, the absence of any building code violations issued by the city on other real property that's owned by that person, any member or principal, officer, major stakeholder, parent, subsidiary, predecessor, or other affiliated person with the person or the person's business. That is straight from the statute. Those are the major qualifications. And so you can go to the next one. So you have a selection process, and basically what's happening here in this selection process is the general statute allows qualified receivers to be appointed to a distressed property in which the city has established an ordinance for demolition or repair. With these qualifications, we're taking it a step further to help qualify potential receivers that we can hand up their qualifications to a Superior Court judge and ask the judge to appoint this receiver to a distressed property that we have identified in our upheld decisions. So we currently have the request for qualifications. That period, we just ran it till December the 2nd for interested persons or businesses or contractors or nonprofit entities. And we've asked for that supportive documentation based upon the statute, and where the statute is not clear on any specifics, we've included in the request for qualifications standards that are found elsewhere in either our past practices or in the rehabilitation process and rehabilitation efforts. The pilot initiative is to address 20 properties, 20 of the distressed properties in which there's an ordinance established. These properties, we will determine them and select them based on an analysis of the property condition, their value, their ownership status, areas of interest or high visibility, and the identified property clusters. Once those are selected, we would be able to pair one property by its highest score with our first qualified receiver in line, and we would work with that receiver for them to create and present us a plan of action that would address all code compliance violations, that would bring the property back to the minimum standards. And then we would go to the courthouse and present the receiver's qualifications, as well as that plan of action, which will have the timeline and its cost, to a judge and ask the judge to appoint this receiver to the property. Now, when you read the statute, you'll notice that the judge does not have to appoint our receiver, nor does the judge have to appoint anyone else that comes before the court. They can appoint a non-qualified receiver, and the statute talks about this. Because before we go to a hearing, all respondents that owns a property or has liens to a property, banks, they all have to be notified that such a hearing would occur. The resolution process: the receiver carries out their plan of action and remediates the property. The court oversees compliance of the plan of action. The city oversees compliance of the order to repair or demolish. And then the receiver's path to that resolution is, once they rehabilitate the property, they get an opportunity to retain the property for 2 years, and they can place a tenant in it, create a revenue stream of rent, and then after the 2-year period, they have to report back to the court and reevaluate how much income they've taken in versus how much expenses they have placed onto the property. And then once the final accounting is done, there's three actions that could take place. One, if the owner of the property wants to retain ownership, then they would pay the receiver's lien, and the judge would close the case. If the owner does not want to pay the lien, or there is no owner that is present on the property, the judge can allow the receiver to foreclose on their liens. And then the other action that could happen is the owner could trade their deed with the receiver in lieu of having to pay the lien or go through a foreclosure process. That entire process is completely between the receiver and the courts, not anything with the city. And that's the process. That's all I have, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Troy. We have a list here of contact information. I'll leave that up on the screen for just a few moments. We do have 9 questions in the queue, and we'll kind of rewind to Cindy to start those questions. And then as folks have additional questions after we go through that initial set, we'll open up for folks to chime in on their own and ask those questions as well. There is a raise the hand kind of feature that you can use if you're able to on your screen. If not, you can also jump in on the chat, and I'll keep monitoring that as well. Our first question, go ahead and take the share screen off. Our first question is for Cindy, and it's from Sheena Beasley. Will there still be 400 plus homes after redevelopment of Smith Homes? Yeah, what is the number of homes that will be remaining after redevelopment?
That is really a question probably directed to the Greensboro Housing Authority. I don't see any of their representatives on the call. There are, I believe, 430 units at Smith Homes now. Current projections for the build out to for the various phases has it coming in a little less than that. So it is probably not going to be 430 at the end of the day when they have redeveloped the entire site.
If I recall from memory, the margin was like about 30 or 40 units would be lost overall.
Right. And a lot of that has to do with some of the different spacing requirements that they're going to have and trying to get units in there.
Sheena also asks, how will you meet the homeless issue when they have no funds? And Sheena, did you want to expand on that? I'm not sure if that was directed for Cindy or a general question.
Stephen, I think that was when Liz was speaking.
Okay.
But it can be with any of the programs that has been discussed today. If a person is homeless with no funds, how do you anticipate assisting them?
So, and thank you for that question. So outside of our regular CARES Act, one second. Sorry, I'm getting sorry, we're close colleagues here. So outside of our CARES Act funds, we have a regular allocation for homelessness prevention programs, which includes several different types of activities, including emergency shelter, day shelter, supportive services, and even some transitional housing that we fund with our regular RFP process. And to date, this particular fiscal year, we have put out an additional, a little over $1.5 million to those funds or to those programs. To directly answer your question though, if an individual or a household presents that has no income and is experiencing homelessness, they can seek assistance or through coordinated entry, which is operated through Partners Ending Homelessness and the Continuum of Care. And so that would be the most direct avenue by which they can get into our continuum, get assessed. They have what's called a VI SPDAT conducted on them and their household to determine, their vulnerability experiencing homelessness, and they're prioritized based on that VI SPDAT score. So largely anyone, like I said, experiencing that would need to go through that system, and then the continuum of care consists of all of Guilford County, or most of Guilford County's homeless service providers, other providers that provide those services, and they get connected to the best housing solution to meet their needs and address their barriers. Our role and my role is to help to support those agencies in the city of Greensboro with funding and oversight to meet those needs. But the direct service itself is provided through those homeless service providers. I hope that addresses your question.
Next couple of questions are for Sophia around down payment assistance. First off, is there a credit score minimum?
So in general, when people are applying for a mortgage, they have what's called a tri-merge credit report. That's all 3 credit bureaus. The magic number right now is 640. 640 being the middle score. When you go to apply for a loan, they toss out the highest score and they toss out the lowest, and they go with the middle score. So the current score, middle score, needed to get down payment assistance locally and at the state level is 640.
Very good. The next question from Robbie Dunnigan is, what portion of the previously approved city bond remains to be used, and will they be applied to this new down payment assistance program? And that may be Cindy question as well, I believe.
That's a Cindy question.
Hold on. I just lost my mute. There we go. Yes, we have, at this point, we have expended about 2/5 of the bonds, or about $10 million, and we have assisted just over 1,000 households.
Thank you. Down payment assistance target areas, I think Sophia chimed in and kind of answered this question. Why were they different from the city plan?
Yeah, just in case somebody didn't see it, and Cindy, you can chime in here too. The ones that are on the FAQ that I talked about are the ones that were identified before the consultants came in and evaluated the city. And so they found that those areas that were mentioned in Cindy's presentation were also areas that could greatly benefit from some additional funding in those neighborhoods. Would that be correct, Cindy?
Yes, we will be looking at the targeting areas, the geographic targeting under the down payment assistance program to include areas like the city's redevelopment areas, any neighborhood reinvestment areas that we're actively carrying out work in, or any special areas that might come up, God forbid, another tornado or something like that, but areas where we would be attempting to build back and strengthen homeownership.
Question for Liz from Adrian Spinner. How will you ensure equity and representation in the working groups? What percentage will be people of color, immigrants, and members of the LGBT community? What is the ratio between developers, landlords versus current tenants and folks who have lived experience with housing insecurity? Those in the community should not be only heard at the neighborhood meetings, they need to be in the decision-making table with the developers and donors.
I'm not entirely sure if that's directed at me, but what I will add to that is from the homelessness perspective, which is my area of focus. You know, we are looking at efforts to one of the requirements for our grants is that our agencies that we fund have someone with lived experience on their boards, so they can provide that feedback and provide that lived experience to help guide and navigate adjustments to their programs and to their services. Additionally, that is something that internally I'm also looking into about how we can implement more of that direct experience or with homelessness to guide and lead some of the work that I'm involved with. So from a homelessness perspective, we're looking at, it's very much a multi-part question, and I don't have a direct answer for you yet, and I can get with you separately to discuss that. But from a lived experience for individuals who've experienced homelessness, you know, we are looking more so into getting their voice heard and helping to guide and direct our work around that as well. I don't know if anyone else as a presenter has anything to add. I think it's a multi-part complex question that might take multiple vantage points to answer.
Definitely. Cindy, in particular, how does that relate to the redevelopment of neighborhoods?
Yeah, that's where it's going to be critical to accumulate as many voices and as much input as we can, so that we make sure that we're addressing not just the programs or the issues that can be seen, like a dilapidated house, but the larger issues within a community and the community of neighbors, not just the community of houses.
Thank you. Anyone else want to join in on that, or? From Sheena, how many families did you assist with rapid rehousing per category for Liz?
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
How many families were assisted with rapid rehousing per category?
Well, rapid rehousing is its own singular category, and our two agencies that we funded with those funds is the Salvation Army of Greensboro, who we have a history with working on rapid rehousing in our community, and a new subrecipient or grantee was the YWCA of Greensboro. And so because that program is more tailored towards it's not just short-term assistance, it's really looking at stabilizing that family without those preconditions like I mentioned, so employment, income, substance abuse, things like that. And so the intent is to get them rapidly rehoused and then address those barriers for housing stability. So let me just take a look here. With rapid rehousing, we assisted in, and it's kind of going to be scattered and weird with the way that we receive the allocations. So for to date, we have served through both Salvation Army and YWCA, I think roughly, I'm looking at my numbers here, 1 second. I think it's roughly 20 to 25 households so far. But again, looking at ensuring long-term stability with these, individuals and households that have barriers that need long-term addressing. And again, I'm happy to release the new numbers. Again, I was out for majority of November, and so to be additive to that, I can provide that update as well, and we can share that, Stephen, at a later date. But to date, with the implementation of those two programs, between 20 to 25 households have been assisted.
Great. Paula asks Troy, will there be another application round to apply for the receivership program?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So Stephen provided a link to the receivership page, and within that link is where a document known as the RFQ, the request for qualifications. There is an open enrollment listed within this document. The initial award period closed December the 2nd at 3 p.m. And we're currently getting ready to review those proposals. I know that we've received about 7 of them, but I've not looked at them, not opened them yet. But in section 1 of that RFQ, it's 1.13 is the section. After the initial award announcement, which in that RFQ, that award announcement will be December the 11th. After that initial award announcement, open enrollment begins. Anyone can apply to become a receiver through this same RFQ. The submission requirements and materials that's requested is the same. The scoring matrix of scoring at least 60 points. If the responsive proposal reaches 60 points, then the receiver is automatically qualified. And we would collect their information and add them to the list of our current receivers.
Follow up to that, I think you've answered part of Andrew's question. Andrew had asked how many had been qualified to date, how many are Black-owned businesses, and there's a follow-up question from Paula, much to the same, how many are minority or women and Black-owned businesses? Are they being given any priority in the receivership program?
Okay. Yeah, so right now the period just closed, so the proposals have not been unsealed. They're required to be sealed. The administrative supervisor has those to turn over to me, so they've not been turned over yet. I would expect them anytime now. There is, in the scoring matrix, there is a scoring prioritization given to MWBE businesses on the points criteria, as well as if the business is not an MWB certified business, if they subcontract to an MWB business, they're also granted points as well. So it is very much promoted for minority-owned or women-owned business enterprises to be a part of this program.
Thank you. From Bob Kohler, and this is kind of a general question, maybe Cindy can tackle this one. What is the status of the effectiveness of collaboration among governmental entities and various other partners? What kind of intergovernmental collaboration is going on, especially as it pertains to these programs we've talked about?
There's a lot of it within the city. There's a little less of it between the city and other governmental entities. And that's one of the issues that we want to explore and to draw in and to make sure that we're all working together where we can. Within the city, we have very close working relationships with the other development departments within the city. We work on teams with the planning department, with the transportation department. We're actually working all together on a team with Parks and Rec and libraries as well, looking at specific planning initiatives related around housing and other issues.
I'll throw out there, just because I'm helping. There's a grant application going out between Piedmont Triad Regional Council of Governments and the City of Greensboro to link together lead-safe housing and weatherization funds, allowing to leverage those two funding streams. So I know that discussion is out there and that there are attempts to improve upon the intergovernmental relationships.
Yeah, especially where our interests cross like that. We're all providing rehabilitation services, but we're all doing it according to the program guidelines that drive us, which may be a little different. And how do we effectively link those up to maximize the benefit that an individual household can receive?
Liz, Troy, did you guys have anything to add on that? Sonia?
No, I think that was covered.
Thanks. From Casey Thomas. Casey, do you want to ask your question? It's a longer one. Yep.
So actually, I see Casey's question and the document that was released, and what we're trying to do is do these monthly, close to monthly if we can, updates about where we are with the CARES Act funding. And so I think I can answer your question, Casey. I think that you were looking at the question being, it appears as though only a quarter of people who have submitted applications have received assistance, and I believe you're in referencing the rent and utility assistance program, and possibly the mortgage assistance program. But the reason for that is because there is an influx of hundreds and hundreds of applications, and so it's a Greensboro Housing Coalition is working to process those applications as quickly as they can. I think Sophia can speak to this a little bit as well, because her agency manages and implements the mortgage assistance program. And so it's just a matter of trying to process them as quickly as they can. So it's not a lack of do they qualify. Some are not eligible for the program for various reasons. Some folks have applied that live outside of the city of Greensboro limits. So those are examples, but a majority of folks is just getting the application through, getting all the documentation needed, and getting that check out. So it's not a lengthy process, but it is a very it's a process that we have hundreds of applications that they're working to process at any given time with constantly. I get weekly updates from them, and they get anywhere between 100 to 250 new applications per week to build on top of that influx that they got at the beginning of the release and of the program. So it's not because they're ineligible for the most part. It's just because they're going as quickly as they can with the constant add to that list of getting checks out. And Sophia, I don't know if you want to add your own direct experience with that as well to support that.
Well, what I will add is on the mortgage assistance side, we don't have nearly the volume that the Housing Coalition has. And it is still a lengthy process. It's a matter of getting the right paperwork, verifying that the hardship was COVID-19 related, getting checks cut. We have tried to streamline the process, and for us, it's taken somewhere between 3 to 4 weeks from start to finish once we get all the information in. And once again, we're trying to make it as easy as possible. Both applications are very short, but we still have to document the actual hardship, and that takes a little bit of time.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Just to answer that additional, I think you had a couple of issues there or questions there, Casey. So there's other barriers. Yes, there's other barriers, but for our CARES Act funds, we do have to tie that back to an actual COVID-related reason for needing that assistance. So that adds a layer of complexity that we also have to address. And then additionally, to answer your question about getting additional assistance elsewhere, they can. And so the HOPE program just closed out applications or shut. Stephen, I'm playing catch up from being out, but I know that process, the applications were closed, but I think it's because they received hundreds, if not thousands, of applications. So that was a separate program. So there's multiple programs out there, and they could have received assistance. Some of our local agencies have private dollars where they can provide assistance as well. And so one of the other things that we have to look at is ensuring there's not a duplication of benefits. And so that's another thing that we have to double check as our agencies process these applications. So yes, there are other avenues for assistance. Could they have gotten assistance through them? Absolutely. We have to ensure that if they did, that we're not providing a duplication of benefits.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thanks. Sheena asks, where will the remainder of the 400 plus families, the difference between units that are going to be RAD converted and those that are currently existing at Smith Homes, where will they be placed? Where will they go? And this might be a public housing question more than a city of Greensboro question.
Sorry, I was reading a later question. What did you say?
Where will the remainder of those families, the difference between the 400 and the 436 units, where will they go? Where will they be placed?
Yeah, that's a process that the Greensboro Housing Authority will need to go through. They need to offer options to everyone who has to be either temporarily or permanently displaced. They need to offer them either units in other projects that they have, or they can offer Section 8 vouchers that allows people to go out and choose their own units, but they need to provide that assistance to help people land in a good and safe place. I will say that the city is actually in the process now of closing a loan on a 31 unit property just south of Smith Homes. So we will be providing an additional 31 units of affordable quality rental housing in that area as well.
Excellent news. Let's see. Frank Ajalo had asked for flyers from all of these programs. I'm going to give my staffer, Atija Farmer, who's on the line here, a job of connecting back to everybody and getting flyers.
So, Stephen, I'm just, for quickness, I'm going to just post the link. We do have flyers for the rental and utility assistance program and the mortgage assistance program on our webpage, and I'll connect to that.
Excellent.
Just for those two programs.
Thanks. And I'll repost those. Sophia, I think I've got your link as well.
Yes.
And we'll repost those as well on our website and make sure that that's available. And Frank, I'll get back with you with PDFs if you need.
And Stephen, you have our links, and Sonia can send you the lead safe Greensboro flyer.
Perfect. Cindy, I saw that long question come in there from Shonda. Did you want to address that with zoning ordinances?
Yes, and that is part of that intergovernmental and within government work that needs to be done. The city has, just prior to adopting the House of Greensboro plan, adopted the comprehensive plan, which set out sort of the broad goals around how the city wants to develop in the future. The piece of work that needs to happen now is the implementation of those goals. What are the policy changes and the procedural changes that need to be enacted to make those goals a reality? And part of our job in neighborhood development is making sure that affordable housing is at the forefront of those policy changes.
Thank you, Cindy. And we know that there's a lot going on state level at the same time around kind of uniform zoning, the 160D revisions that are taking place across the state that will allow a little bit more local flexibility and some real everyday language in the ordinances for things like ADUs, in-law suites, other approaches to housing. I see a question here from Fanta Dorley, are any of these programs looking for volunteers for intake work and helping move on the waiting list?
Absolutely.
I don't know if I can answer for GHC, but I imagine that they would welcome the volunteers. Absolutely. And Santa Dorley, I can connect you. Sophia, you have Sophia's contact information. I can privately message you GHC's contact information.
Thank you. Any other questions? Would anybody like to jump in there? Adrian just posted a question. Adrian, do you want to just ask that live?
Sure, I can do that. So with these various projects and various partnerships that include private developers and public entities, how are you going to work to improve the entire community? It's not just about housing. It is about eliminating food deserts, especially in East Greensboro. Repairs from natural disasters, like repairs that still haven't happened since the 2018 tornado. Improving these schools in these underserved communities. How will you work with other government entities and push other government entities to improve the entire community? Not just make the houses prettier.
So what I will add is, and Cindy, you might need to jump in here as well. The efforts as a result of the tornado in 2018 are still ongoing. Repairs are still ongoing. Housing Consultants Group happens to be a part of a team that actively meets and updates the repairs that are being done. I don't know about the repairs that have not been done, but efforts on the part of Community Housing Solutions and Habitat for Humanity are still underway in repair as well as rebuilding in East Greensboro. We've helped them acquire land. We've helped Community Housing Solutions acquire 10 lots in the tornado affected area. So Cindy, you want to jump in and share what else is going on?
Yes, I can do that. We have 4 nonprofit agencies that are involved in the rebuilding process under the request for proposals that we put out for tornado repair and reconstruction. We've repaired about 60 homes. We have completed building 3, and we have 9 right now in the hopper, with another about 10 getting ready to go in the new year. So you're going to start to see a good bit of new construction activity beginning to happen out there. We are also working on a program to address some of the damage that was caused by the tornado to some of the trees that are out in that area that are causing a good deal of just blighting influence by when you look around and see nothing but a trunk standing that was left standing or laying on the ground. But your question involved a good bit more than that. It was the other government entities working together to improve the entire community. When we go in for neighborhood reinvestment, we are going to be looking comprehensively about what is going on in that neighborhood and what are the resources that we can bring to bear to improve conditions. Right now, the city is working together with various departments, looking at an area just east of downtown and what can be done in that area with all of the city's investments that are happening in that location.
Thank you.
Other questions? I have one for Troy, if Troy's still there, and or Cindy. I think it's kind of a tag team question. Can you talk a little bit about capitalization for those who are receivers? Are receivers going to be able to tap into low-cost loans from the city, from NC Housing Finance or other resources? Will these homes that qualify pre-1978, perhaps lead hazard homes, would they qualify for other rehab funds while in the hands of the receiver?
I don't see Troy jumping back in here. The first part of your question was, is there funding going to be made available? This initial pilot phase, we are targeting projects that are likely going to be able to be done solely through the receiver's auspices, because we don't want to make this overly complicated. This is our test case. This is new to the courts. This is new to the receivers. This is new to the city. We need to be able to make this as streamlined as possible so that they can get the properties repaired, get them back into use as affordable housing, and clear out that process with the courts. As we get into more difficult cases, then we're going to probably need to look at some form of subsidy in order to be able to make a project financially feasible. But for this initial pilot phase, we're looking at some of those properties that are not the truly distressed properties, but ones that with a relatively small amount of money could be brought back, made into affordable, available rental housing units, and help with providing that rental housing. And Troy, there was a second part to that question. Did you catch that? Or Stephen, do you want to repeat the second part of that question?
Sorry.
The second part essentially was, can you stack some of the other assistance programs like weatherization, lead safe housing, and others with the receiver, even though they aren't the deed holder at that point, since they're not the owner, would they be able to qualify for those types of intervention funds?
I think it's really going to depend on the ownership situation, and what legally we may be allowed to do or not allowed to do based on the program terms and the funding source that's available.
If the funding source does not require a tenant income-based analysis or evaluation, and it's just the applicant itself, we make an attempt to try to qualify that property owner. But it's going to be quite difficult to qualify a person that doesn't own the residence to receive that benefit when it is generally tied to that property, like Cindy said.
Thank you. Susan Rogers, did you want to jump in here with your question?
Yeah, hi, thanks. So for the receivership program, once the unit is in the hands of the receiver and they've made the repairs and they're allowed to rent it, is that restricted to an affordable rent level, say using the fair market rents, or is it market rate?
It's any rate. It's not tied to a restriction, because no funding source or program that we're using or federal funds is tied to it.
Thank you.
Are you guys in Wilmington ready to do the next round of test cases?
Oh, sure, yes.
Thanks. For those who don't know, Ms. Rogers is in charge of the housing and neighborhood development there in Wilmington, and working on some similar issues to what we have here in Greensboro. Other questions? Stephen,
yes. Can I add something I wanted to make a note of here, because we're talking about rent versus home ownership. What I have found since we started doing the down payment assistance program through September 30th, we've provided down payment assistance with the city funds to over 500 families. So I'm really excited about that. We hit 317 in 2019 with #100homes, but what I've noted about the assistance, very diverse population of people receiving it, but what I've noticed, about 30 to 40% of them are paying less for their mortgage than they were paying for rent. And that makes a huge point to me. It shows that home ownership, if somebody wants to achieve it, will help you get there. And the fact that we're telling people, once again, looking back at the tornado, especially if they're going to be paying less in mortgage than they paid in rent, my comment to them as a housing counselor is, there's your emergency fund. Let's start it off right away with the money, your savings that you were already spending, because what the tornado taught us was life happens to everybody. It's not going to be if, it's when. So we very much try to provide a comprehensive approach to our housing counseling method. We talk about, let's get you in the home, but let's talk about what happens after. Part of our post-purchase talks about home maintenance. But the big thing we talk about is your emergency fund, your go-to fund. If something happened in 3 minutes, like that tornado happened, could you pick your family up and go stay someplace outside of another family member's house for a week? Use that as your first short-term goal. I can stay a week somewhere, live and eat. And we really try to push that and let them know that life happens, and the journey about home ownership is not just getting you in the home, it's keeping you in the home.
I think along those same lines, pointing out to folks that whether you're getting a 15-year or 30-year or 20-year mortgage, your mortgage, if it's fixed rate, is staying the same while your rent is going up every year. Rent is floating at market or at a HUD set amount, but it's going up every year. And we've seen a 65% increase in the last 8 years in average rents in Greensboro. If you're locked into a mortgage, you're literally saving more and more money every year, not just in the equity that you're developing the house, but in the cost of living that you're paying on previous year's dollars. Secondarily, right now with the refinance rates, I just refinanced my house. I'm paying $400 less this month than I did last month. That's great. You can only do that though if you're owning a home and being able to take advantage of changes in the market.
Good point.
Other questions? Also open up for it if there are any announcements, any, again, housing related topics that are coming up.
Stephen, I think that Mr. Joyner has a question.
Yes.
I see. I saw it pop up.
Look, you don't know, I'm very out there, so I'm like me actually raising my hand. Okay, so can you guys hear me?
Yes, sorry.
Actually, it's very funny. I was just, and some of you guys that know me, I have sort of two questions. I live in Willow Oaks, and I remember one of the young ladies saying like, what would happen if 3 minutes? Just so you guys know, I'm 2 blocks from where that tornado hit. I actually saw it. It almost hit my house, and it jumped and went over and tore the school up. So that could have been me easily. So if you've never seen anything like that or don't understand how precarious your situation is, count your blessings, because it was almost me. But anyway, so what I've learned, you know, is I want to, and anyone can answer this, I'm trying to learn the most effective way to help people. That's one reason why I brought my house in Willow Oaks. How can I make sure that, obviously it sounds like time is of essence, so you know, a lot of applications, so you don't, if you're trying to help somebody, you don't want to spin your wheels and go in the wrong direction, because that can set someone down, you know, a month or two down behind the path. So can anyone advise me, because I actually have a situation where a family of 6 that he just called me, I'm trying to help them, and Sale has helped me. What's the most effective way to do things so that I expeditiously get things done for people if I'm trying to help them or trying to direct people to the right area, if they're don't have a place to go, if they need food, or what's the most effective way, or if there's one number to call so I can get direction to effectively help them? I know it was a lot.
I can jump in on that one. A good starting place is the American Red Cross, you know, for housing. They also have a lot of, you know, a lot of resources, and they would know where to send you, you know, where to send a family. They coordinate with various agencies, and I think that'd be a great starting place.
Several people jumped in with one. Yep.
I'll jump in really quickly, just to kind of echo what I'm seeing in the chat. 211's a great resource as well. I'm a former employee of United Way of Greater Atlanta, and so 211 is an excellent resource to access, you know, what's out there and what's available. And just to kind of answer, one, I think you have to address what their need is and determine, the best route, because again, my focus is on homelessness, and so I can probably better address homelessness barriers and what those needs are, and that pathway might be slightly different than, say, someone, you know, I don't know, someone through any of these other programs. And so, but for homelessness specifically, 211 is a great resource, and then coordinated entry through the Guilford County Continuum of Care and Partners Ending Homelessness is a good start as well, dependent upon what that homelessness need is.
And the other thing is, you know, because we're all partners, if you call Housing Consultants Group and we have mortgage assistance and we don't have the assistance that somebody's looking for, we always refer you to the agency that can help you. So it's not like, oh, I don't do that, we can't help you. We will always direct you someplace else.
And I also want to add from the Greensboro Housing Coalition connection to this, just knowing that there are agencies that exist like GHC that is committed to community engagement and collaboration. And so I think honoring that and knowing that these connections do exist in Greensboro and continuing to communicate with agencies and, you know, building capacity that will encourage these collaborations. So if there is someone is coming in for a housing issue, but also is in need of food and other different access, I think that is my take on that question, Derek.
And the other great thing is because the Greensboro Housing Coalition, Housing Consultants Group, and Community Housing Solutions are all housed in the same building. Sometimes it's just a matter of running up and down the stairs and saying, look, I got somebody on the phone. She's getting ready to call you. She's got something very vital going on. And so we all work well together, the city.
So you guys all know each other?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, I don't know. I'm like, so if I get this person, like literally, I was talking to Sel. I actually got someone in touch with her. The guy literally was calling me while I was on this call, and I actually had this meeting scheduled months before, but it just so happens that it's like, this is another reason why I'm here, so I can learn how to help people. But he called me while I was actually listening. So, all right. So if I call to one of you, like I talked to Sel, they can talk to her and then find out where he needs to go next, right? That's sort of how that works?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like a web. We're all connected.
Okay, good. That's good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect. And I think we've got time for just one more. Paula, you're next.
Thank you very much. So I get calls weekly. So for example, the Guilford County jails and for the Greensboro jail, there's about 300 releases a month of people that do not have a home to go to. So I see, Stephen, that you have the coordinated entry hotline. What about a coordinated reentry hotline?
Jody, are you still here? Okay.
Well, I can take that as well. Just so I'm not. I did some reentry initiatives and was a part of that in Atlanta, and so I'm still kind of dipping my toes here to kind of figure out that system as well. But one of the efforts or entities that you can call is the Interactive Resource Center. They have a crisis triage team. And the intent behind that crisis triage team is to address those individuals with higher acuity, meaning they're exiting the ER or the hospital, or they're exiting jail and have no place to go. And so I can send that or put it in the chat, but their crisis triage team is there specifically to address those issues and those barriers and to support that population within, that subpopulation within homelessness. So we're really targeting those folks with high acuity, those individuals, if you're not familiar with the VIS, BDAT, those who have a high vulnerability to dying on the streets, which are going to be folks exiting the jail with mental health, substance abuse, or co-occurring disorders. So I can connect you with them, but that's a great resource, and that's their team is designed to address that. I know there's other initiatives out there with reentry. I'm just not completely connected yet to those entities.
And I'm familiar with the IRC and the resources that they have available, but they often are overwhelmed too, because there's so many different issues that they are trying to resolve. but the point of housing. So if we're letting, you know, we have all of these releasing people without any clothes, without an ID, without any food, without any socks, you know, the attrition rate is certainly going to be high, remain high. So just the concerted effort to address those specifically, re-entering on a monthly basis.
Yeah, agreed.
So I just dropped in the chat Dismas charities Sheena Beasley brought up. There's a link to that now. Thrive Greensboro, which is through the Human Relations Department, City of Greensboro, kind of acts as a clearinghouse for reentry related issues. And their telephone number is there as well. And it looks like a few others have chimed in. We're coming up on the hour. I know several of us have 2 o'clock meetings, our back-to-back Zoom life now. Lots of little squares of people to talk to. I really appreciate all of our speakers today. We've covered a lot of territory, many important programs that are in existence, coming into existence, and being targeted at communities that need the most in terms of rehabilitation of housing and improvement of the environmental conditions around them. Thank you so much for the 85 plus folks who've joined us on the talk today. Remember that in January we do not have a housing hangout. We will return in February, February 5th, I believe it was, to that topic of alternative ways of owning and sharing ownership. And we'll have a good lineup for you there. Any last words, Liz?
No, thank you everyone for the opportunity to share. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Troy, Cindy, Sonia.